Now we get into Kazarev's great body of work, which is the torsion fields. And the torsion fields can be instantaneous. But it was completely written out of physics because it allowed things that were going to upset the economics of the time. By the way, the thing that I really want to bring across here is the fact that this ether, this so-called ether, is the variable permeability and permittivity of space. I mean, it's obvious. You can't have a space that emits waves that are defined, the velocity of the waves are defined the permeability and the permittivity without having such a space. But that was wiped out because that requires two kinds of numbers because they don't use the same mathematics. The Earth's rotation introduces a one-way energy gradient in its electromagnetic field that causes the atomic clock circumnavigating westward to run an average of 273 nanoseconds faster than similar reference clocks that rest on the Earth. The airborne clocks that circumnavigate eastward against the absolute motion of the spinning Earth ran an average of 59 nanoseconds slower. Now, the standard model has an invariant round-trip speed of light and assumed invariant 377 ohm vacuum impedance that conceals Maxwell's variant one-way light speed. By so obscuring the two energy density dependent permittivity and permeability required to produce the variable vacuum impedance gradient. Now this is the key to this absolute motion in the ether. The fact that this impedance is variable. All you need is some massive energy to literally compress space. You know that light waves, when they go around a star, bend. Well, that's why they bend. I mean, it's not rocket science. It was understood clearly by Nikola Tesla. To make a long story short, I built a magnifying transmitter. Are you familiar with Tesla's work already? Are you familiar with it? His greatest contribution to the world was his magnifying transmitter. And the word magnifying transmitter tells you a lot. It magnified. It was not just a simple transmitter, but what it was this phaser technology, force amplification by stimulated energy resonance, as opposed to frequency amplification. In a laser, you lose about 90% of your energy. You have to excite the laser with very intense light. It changes the population of your atomic states and you can get back coherent light, but you still blow 90% of your energy. With phaser, you collect all of the energy. It's autoparametric, and that's the thing that keeps them exploding, because with such a system, you'll keep regenerating the energy and it'll just keep increasing and increasing, because we live in a sea of energy. There is literally, and there are many sources of this energy. The absolute motion is only one, and I want to expand on that just a second, because one of the latest things, they believe now that there are a series of these, quote, great attractors, and they're all in line, and that goes back to the experiments which I would like to preface all of these things with. When I was a teenager, I think I was 18, and I had a laboratory in Greenwich Village, and one of the doctors, Dr. R.P. Shaw, who at the time was considered one of the world's authorities on shock waves, had a contract with, it was called the Project Squid, and it was a consortium of all the major universities in the United States to study the German wonder weapons. They had brought back with the occupation forces all the things that they wanted to study. And Shaw's particular job was to study the Mach disk generator, which the Germans had developed as a vortex weapon. It could crush a B-29 like a moth, but unfortunately it didn't get into operation in time, and that was perhaps good for the world. But what they succeeded in doing, and I was privileged in that I saw some data which is probably super classified, but I saw the film. I mean, they thought I was a child. It didn't matter. I mean, but I certainly remember it. And this was there's a device called a Mach disk, and this is at the basis of almost all of my work. Has anyone here heard of the Mach disk? Oh, you know about it?
Well, not very much about it.
Well, tell me what you know, because I've
Well, does it have something to do?
The microphone. This should be recorded. We'd be glad to hear it.
I'm not sure that I have, but it has something to do with the saucer elevation and there was the flying of like flying saucers that the Germans had.
I am sure it does, but remember, Mach was a scientist and of great, and he was not interested in anything that he couldn't demonstrate. A Mach disk, and I don't know how he succeeded in doing it because it was sort of like Tesla technology. I mean, it turns out that if you can create a toroidal vortex at 5 times the thermodynamic speed limit. Now, when Shaw came back from the Anahuac Atoll for the study of the hydrogen bomb, he built a 2-mile-long plywood tunnel that was big enough to drive a military truck through. That tunnel was backfilled with helium because helium has an adiabatic constant of 1, and they could measure the shock wave of our first hydrogen bomb. But what they discovered was superluminal velocity. And so the military knew about superluminal velocity in 1948. But the important point here is the nature of the Mach disk, because that's what this German wonder weapon was all about. Mach discovered that if you have something, and this is where Shaw comes in. He came back. I didn't know what he was talking about, but it sounded pretty good for an 18-year-old. If I could create the right kind of a magnetic field, I could punch a hole in the fabric of time. Wow. That's what I wanted to do. Now, you have to understand that the fabric of time is entropy. So all he was talking about was what Prigogine did in 1977 when he won the Nobel Prize. But, and that gets into atomic memory and reversing the vector of time. And all these machines which use this technique of phase conjugation. Phase conjugation, basically, there's a whole article in Scientific American called Time Reversed Light. And it's a very good way to describe this. We've done it with lasers, and lasers are very easy to understand because the mathematics is very simple compared to other systems. But I'm getting off the topic of the Mach disk. What they did, they found, and this is quite a trick back in 1948, but they found a motorcycle that could run at, I don't know why they did this, they got a lot of things that blew up, but they found one that could hold together at 40,000 RPM. They needed a piston system that could be revved up to 40,000 RPM in order to pump a long stainless steel tube. It was a resonant tube. It took 380 horsepower to overcome the energy to pump this thing. But now, and then they had to have Schlieren photography to make these particles visible. But this machine was creating these Mach disk particles. Now, as the piston moved forward in the tube, you would see at the end of this long tube the formation of a vortex. Now, this vortex had to go at 5 times the shockwave speed. You know, we have never gotten anything to go except perhaps these super rockets to go at these velocities. But in any event, this was just a spinning vortex. And as the minute the piston reached the end of its stroke, it would have to stop and slow down. By the way, this is the essence of the second law of thermodynamics. Rectilinear motion. You cannot exceed you can't get around the second law of thermodynamics. You've got to die. You have to create a loss, because when that piston slows down and stops, you're losing energy, and then it reverses. Now, the minute that happens, this Mach disk detaches itself from the end of the tube. Now the piston is pulling back, and a new Mach disk is being formed, but this is counter-rotating. So you have, let's say, a matter Mach disk and an antimatter Mach disk, and they go in series, and these would be like trains. And they were able to move this Schlieren field mechanism down so they could see what happened further on in the building. And the first Mach disk, as it moves through space, is organizing the space. So the Mach disk that's following it is gradually catching up to it. At some point they touch each other. At that moment they touch, that whole area scintillates. And pow, a new one is formed. with all of the energy of the complete system, there is no loss of energy, and that's what made the German window weapon so effective. They could fire this thing at an airplane and put a gigawatt right at that point in space, and that's what was part of our Star Wars program. So this is not new. The military has all kinds of things that you can't believe in their black ops programs. This is one of them. But what is important about these Mach disks and the fact that this is what we saw is in astrophysics. If what the astrophysicists saw was that the reality is a series of these Mach disks, perhaps our black holes are nothing more than a series. By the way, I had a paper which I wrote on this. It turns out that this great attractor, if they made a photograph of the vectors of all the stars and all the motions, it looks just like a Mach disk. It's amazing. So there may be something to this as being a real model. Now, the reason I'm focused on this is because it's the ideal form of a soliton. We do have the mathematics for it. Elizabeth Roscher, this is one of the things we want to talk to her about, is because this is something that is really understandable. And it can be used, it does exist, and the most amazing thing about Mach disks, and this has been published by the military, it's available, entropy reverses as you pass through the center of the Mach disk.